Today we're going to explore Frankenstein by Mary Shelley through a series of short reading extracts. Instead of simply following the plot, we'll use these passages to understand the relationship between science and literature in this novel. We'll begin with Victor Frankenstein's childhood because his education and early environment determine the scientist he will become.
No human being could have passed a happier childhood than myself. My parents were possessed by the very spirit of kindness and indulgence. We felt that they were not the tyrants to rule our lot according to their caprice, but the agents and creators of all the many delights which we enjoyed. When I mingled with other families, I distinctly discerned how peculiarly fortunate my lot was, and gratitude assisted the development of filial love.
In this passage, Victor remembers his childhood as peaceful and loving. His parents were kind and protective, and he grew up feeling fortunate. The novel does not present Victor's father as a harsh or oppressive parent like the movie by Guillermo del Toro does.
My temper was sometimes violent, and my passions vehement, but by some law in my temperature they were turned not towards childish pursuits, but to an eager desire to learn, and not to learn all things indiscriminately. I confess that neither the structure of languages, nor the code of governments, nor the politics of various states possessed attractions for me. It was the secrets of heaven and earth that I desired to learn, and whether it was the outward substance of things, or the inner spirit of nature and the mysterious soul of man that occupied me, still my inquiries were directed to the metaphysical, or in its highest sense, the physical secrets of the world.
Victor describes himself as an intense and emotional child who directs all his energy toward knowledge. His desire to become a scientist begins with a child's fascination for the mysteries of life. He is not interested in social subjects like politics or languages, but in universal questions such as life and nature. This is important because his curiosity is not balanced. He does not want practical knowledge, but ultimate truth.
Elizabeth was of a calmer and more concentrated disposition, but with all my ardor, I was capable of a more intense application and was more deeply smitten with the thirst for knowledge. She busied herself with following the aerial creations of the poets, and in the majestic and wondrous scenes which surrounded our Swiss home, the sublime shapes of the mountains, the changes of the seasons, tempest and calm, the silence of winter, and the life and turbulence of our alpine summers, she found ample scope for admiration and delight. While my companion contemplated with a serious and satisfied spirit the magnificent appearances of things, I delighted in investigating their causes. The world was to me a secret which I desired to divine. Curiosity, earnest research to learn the hidden laws of nature, gladness akin to rapture as they were unfolded to me, are among the earliest sensations I can remember.
The passage presents two romantic attitudes toward nature: contemplation and investigation. Elizabeth represents the poetic response to nature, while Victor represents the scientific one. Elizabeth admires the beauty of nature and responds emotionally to landscapes and seasons. Her attitude reflects the idea of the sublime, where nature is seen as something vast, powerful, and capable of inspiring wonder and contemplation. Victor reacts in the opposite way. He is not satisfied with wonder, he wants explanations and seeks the causes and hidden laws of nature. Another thing to notice is that Victor uses almost religious language. For example, when he says, "The world was to me a secret which I desired to divine." So knowledge becomes a form of revelation. This suggests that science, for him, replaces spirituality.
Natural philosophy is the genius that has regulated my fate. I desire, therefore, in this narration, to state those facts which led to my predilection for that science. When I was 13 years of age, we all went on a party of pleasure to the baths near Thonon. The inclemency of the weather obliged us to remain a day confined to the inn. In this house I chanced to find a volume of the works of Cornelius Agrippa. I opened it with apathy. The theory which he attempts to demonstrate and the wonderful facts which he relates soon changed this feeling into enthusiasm. A new light seemed to dawn upon my mind, and bounding with joy, I communicated my discovery to my father. My father looked carelessly at the title page of my book and said, "Ah, Cornelius Agrippa, my dear Victor, do not waste your time upon this. It is sad trash." I cannot help remarking here the many opportunities instructors possess of directing the attention of their pupils to useful knowledge, which they might otherwise overlook. If, instead of this remark, my father had taken the pains to explain to me that the principles of Agrippa had been entirely exploded, and that a modern system of science had been introduced which possessed much greater powers than the ancient, under such circumstances I should certainly have thrown Agrippa aside. It is even possible that the train of my ideas would never have received the fatal impulse that led to my ruin. But the cursory glance my father had taken of my volume by no means assured me that he was acquainted with its contents, and I continued to read with the greatest avidity.
Here Victor explains how his scientific interest begins. At 13, he reads Cornelius Agrippa, a Renaissance alchemist and occult thinker, and he is fascinated by the idea of discovering hidden secrets of nature. His father rejects the book without explaining why it's wrong, and this becomes a turning point. Without guidance, Victor studies alone, and his curiosity turns into obsession. Mary Shelley suggests that poor scientific education can create dangerous scientists. When knowledge is dismissed without explanation, people look for answers elsewhere, and this can lead to misinformation, fake news, and poor understanding of science, what today we might call a lack of scientific literacy.
When I was about 15 years old, we had retired to our house near Bellerive, when we witnessed a most violent and terrible thunderstorm. It advanced from behind the mountains of Jura, and the thunder burst at once with frightful loudness from various quarters of the heavens. I remained, while the storm lasted, watching its progress with curiosity and delight. As I stood at the door, on a sudden I beheld a stream of fire issue from an old and beautiful oak, which stood about 20 yards from our house, and so soon as the dazzling light vanished, the oak had disappeared, and nothing remained but a blasted stump. When we visited it the next morning, we found the tree shattered in a singular manner. It was not splintered by the shock, but entirely reduced to thin ribbons of wood. I never beheld anything so utterly destroyed. Before this, I was not unacquainted with the more obvious laws of electricity. On this occasion, a man of great research in natural philosophy was with us, and, excited by this catastrophe, he entered on the explanation of a theory which he had formed on the subject of electricity and galvanism, which was at once new and astonishing to me. All that he said threw greatly into the shade Cornelius Agrippa, Albertus Magnus, and Paracelsus, the lords of my imagination. But by some fatality, the overthrow of these men disinclined me to pursue my accustomed studies. It seemed to me as if nothing would or could ever be known. All that had so long engaged my attention suddenly grew despicable. By one of those caprices of the mind which we are perhaps most subject to in early youth, I at once gave up my former occupations, set down natural history and all its progeny as a deformed and abortive creation, and entertained the greatest disdain for a would-be science which could never even step within the threshold of real knowledge. In this mood of mind I betook myself to mathematics and the branches of study appertaining to that science, as being built upon secure foundations, and so worthy of my consideration.
This marks a turning point. Victor abandons alchemy and becomes interested in modern science. Nature is no longer a mystery to admire, but a force that can be studied and understood. The scene contrasts natural life with artificial life. The tree is described as old and beautiful. Nature is ancient and organic, while Victor will later produce something artificial. Galvanism was historically associated with the idea that electricity might animate dead tissue.
It was on a dreary night of November that I beheld the accomplishment of my toils. With an anxiety that almost amounted to agony, I collected the instruments of life around me, that I might infuse a spark of being into the lifeless thing that lay at my feet. It was already 1 in the morning, the rain pattered dismally against the panes, and my candle was nearly burnt out, when, by the glimmer of the half-extinguished light, I saw the dull yellow eye of the creature open. It breathed hard, and a convulsive motion agitated its limbs. How can I describe my emotions at this catastrophe? His limbs were in proportion, and I had selected his features as beautiful. Beautiful! Great God! His yellow skin scarcely covered the work of muscles and arteries beneath. His hair was of a lustrous black and flowing, his teeth of a pearly whiteness. But these luxuriances only formed a more horrid contrast with his watery eyes, that seemed almost of the same color as the dun white sockets in which they were set, his shriveled complexion and straight black lips.
Victor finally animates the creature. The moment should represent success, yet he immediately calls it a catastrophe. Shelley never describes a clear scientific method. The focus is not on how the experiment works, but on its moral consequences. The spark symbolically echoes electricity and Prometheus. Victor steals the power of life, but cannot manage its consequences.
The different accidents of life are not so changeable as the feelings of human nature. I had worked hard for nearly 2 years for the sole purpose of infusing life into an inanimate body. For this I had deprived myself of rest and health. I had desired it with an ardor that far exceeded moderation. But now that I had finished, the beauty of the dream vanished, and breathless horror and disgust filled my heart. Unable to endure the aspect of the being I had created, I rushed out of the room and continued a long time traversing my bedchamber, unable to compose my mind to sleep. I started from my sleep with horror. A cold dew covered my forehead, my teeth chattered, and every limb became convulsed, when, by the dim and yellow light of the moon, as it forced its way through the window shutters, I beheld the wretch, the miserable monster whom I had created. He held up the curtain of the bed, and his eyes, if eyes they may be called, were fixed on me. His jaws opened, and he muttered some inarticulate sounds, while a grin wrinkled his cheeks. He might have spoken, but I did not hear. One hand was stretched out, seemingly to detain me, but I escaped and rushed downstairs. I took refuge in the courtyard belonging to the house which I inhabited, where I remained during the rest of the night, walking up and down in the greatest agitation, listening attentively, catching and fearing each sound as if it were to announce the approach of the demoniacal corpse to which I had so miserably given life.
He rejects the creature immediately after creating it. The real failure is not the experiment, but Victor's reaction. The real sin is not creation, but lack of responsibility. The creature reaches out, possibly trying to communicate, yet Victor interprets it as a threatening. He calls it a monster and a demon before it has done anything wrong. Mary Shelley suggests that the creature becomes monstrous because it is rejected at the moment of its birth.
I am malicious because I am miserable. Am I not shunned and hated by all mankind? You, my creator, would tear me to pieces and triumph. Remember that, and tell me why I should pity man more than he pities me. You would not call it murder. If you could precipitate me into one of those ice rifts and destroy my frame, the work of your own hands, shall I respect man when he contemns me? Let him live with me in the interchange of kindness, and instead of injury, I would bestow every benefit upon him with tears of gratitude at his acceptance. But that cannot be. The human senses are insurmountable barriers to our union. Yet mine shall not be the submission of abject slavery. I will revenge my injuries. If I cannot inspire love, I will cause fear, and chiefly towards you, my archenemy. Because my Creator, do I swear inextinguishable hatred. Have a care. I will work at your destruction, nor finish until I desolate your heart, so that you curse the hour of your birth.
In this scene, the creature confronts Victor for the first time and speaks rationally to him. He explains that he became violent because he was rejected by everyone, especially by his own creator. This passage reverses expectations because the monster speaks logically and morally while Victor reacts with anger and disgust. The creature is not naturally evil, his violence is the result of isolation. Shelley raises an important question. Who is truly human, Victor or the creature? To conclude, we can read a passage from chapter 4 that summarizes the main theme of the novel.
Learn from me, if not by my precepts, at least by my example, how dangerous is the acquirement of knowledge, and how much happier that man is who believes his native town to be his world, than he who aspires to become greater than his nature will allow.
Victor warns us about the danger of knowledge pursued without limits. He realizes his mistake only after it's too late. Mary Shelley is not condemning science, but ambition without responsibility. In conclusion, Frankenstein is much more than a gothic horror story. The message of the novel is still relevant today. Scientific progress can improve human life, but only when it's guided by ethics. The novel also had a lasting cultural impact. It helped create a tradition of monster literature and influenced later figures such as Dracula and many later Gothic villains. At the same time, the creature can be seen as the ancestor of many modern artificial beings, robots, androids, and other creations of science fiction. In our next lesson, we will meet another writer inspired by science and human nature, Robert Louis Stevenson, author of The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.